The warm summer breeze stirred the lace curtains, casting moving shadows on the hardwood floor of the dining room. Charles sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, though he hadn't taken a sip. He tapped his fingers against the table in a slow, irregular rhythm. Diane moved about the kitchen, her movements purposeful as she chopped vegetables. "Charles, you've been awfully quiet today," she said without looking up. She rinsed the knife under the faucet and placed it on the counter. "Is something on your mind?" Charles hesitated, unsure if he wanted to open up. His eyes flicked toward Stella, who stood by the stove stirring a pot of soup. She hummed a soft tune, her voice almost cheerful, as if the weight of last night's discovery hadn't shattered Charles's trust. "I'm just thinking," he finally muttered. His gaze lingered on Stella for a moment too long, and she turned to meet his eyes with a brief, unreadable smile. "Well, think less, act more," Diane said with a light laugh. She poured iced tea into a glass and set it in front of him. "You're always overanalyzing things, Charles. Loosen up a little." Charles forced a weak smile. Diane's cheerful obliviousness grated on him. He wanted to scream the truth, to tell her what he'd found, but he swallowed the urge. "Stella, do you need help with anything?" Diane asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Stella turned with the same poised smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Everything's under control." Her voice was as smooth as ever. Charles noticed her nails, painted a striking red, tapping against the wooden spoon as she stirred. It was the color she wore on nights she claimed to be out with her friends. A flash of the message he'd read last night resurfaced in his mind. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Last night was unforgettable. The sender's name had sent a chill through him, Nathan. Charles clenched his fists under the table, his nails digging into his palms. "Charles, you're staring into space again," Diane said, sitting down across from him. "Are you feeling all right?" He snapped out of his thoughts. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." "Well, you better not let whatever it is ruin your appetite." "Stella worked hard on this lunch," Diane said, her voice carrying a subtle reprimand. Charles's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen, another message from Nathan. This time, the subject line was blank. His stomach churned. "Who's that?" Stella asked, not looking up from the pot. "Just work," Charles lied, locking the phone and shoving it into his pocket. "Can't they give you a break on the weekends?" Diane sighed. Charles nodded absently, but his mind raced. He couldn't ignore the signs anymore. For weeks, he'd noticed Stella's late-night texts, the secretive calls, and the unexplained outings. The evidence was there, yet he had clung to denial. Last night's discovery left no room for doubt. After Stella had fallen asleep, Charles had noticed her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Curiosity, mixed with growing suspicion, had driven him to pick it up. The message from Nathan had confirmed everything he feared. "Lunch is ready," Stella announced, interrupting his thoughts. She carried a steaming pot to the table and set it down with practiced ease. Charles watched her closely as she moved, her expression serene. How could she act so normal? Didn't she feel even a shred of guilt? As they ate, the conversation flowed around him like a distant hum. Diane and Stella chatted about weekend plans, the kids' school activities, and the weather. Charles barely contributed, his mind elsewhere. "You've barely touched your food," Diane pointed out. Charles stabbed at his plate with his fork. "I'm not very hungry." "Don't be ridiculous," Diane said. "You need to eat. You've got a family to look after." Charles's jaw tightened. A family. Is that what this is? He thought bitterly. Stella caught his eye, her smile faltering for the first time that day. "Charles, is something wrong?" For a moment, he considered confronting her right there in front of Diane, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he shook his head. "I'm fine. Just tired." Diane chuckled. "You always work too hard. It's no wonder you're exhausted." Stella reached across the table to touch his hand. Her fingers felt cold. "If there's something on your mind, you can tell me." Charles pulled his hand back, pretending to adjust his watch. "I said I'm fine." The rest of the meal passed in strained silence. Afterward, Diane began clearing the table, and Stella retreated to the living room with a cup of coffee. Charles lingered in the kitchen, his hands gripping the edge of the sink as he stared out the window. "Charles," Diane said softly, coming to stand beside him, "you're not yourself today." I know when something's bothering you. He looked at her, his face a mask of restraint. It's nothing, Mom. She frowned, unconvinced, but didn't press further. As the afternoon wore on, Charles found himself pacing in the backyard. He pulled out his phone and reread Nathan's message for the 10th time, his blood boiling anew. Stella stepped outside, her footsteps light on the patio. Charles? He turned to face her, his expression hard. What do you want? She tilted her head, her smile faint but still there. You've been avoiding me all day. If there's something wrong, just say it. For a moment, Charles almost spoke the truth. But he held back, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. I told you I'm tired. That's all. She didn't look convinced, but didn't push further. Instead, she walked back inside, leaving Charles alone with his thoughts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Charles sat on the patio, staring into the gathering dusk. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. He knew he couldn't stay silent forever. But how would he confront her? How could he face his brother? For now, he would wait. He needed a plan, a way to navigate the storm without losing everything he had built. And so, the evening ended as it had begun, with secrets hanging heavy in the air, waiting to be unraveled. The clinking of silverware filled the room as the family sat around the dinner table. Charles's fork hovered above his plate, untouched. Across from him, Stella laughed brightly at one of Diane's stories about her neighbor's unruly dog. Her laugh grated on him, a sharp reminder of the lie their life had become. And you wouldn't believe it, Charles, Diane was saying, her hands animated as she spoke. The dog jumped right into their pool. Poor Mr. Harris was livid. Stella chuckled, covering her mouth delicately. He always did have a temper. Maybe the dog was trying to teach him to loosen up. Charles forced a smile, the muscles in his face tightening. He couldn't focus on their words. His thoughts circled back to the message he had seen, Nathan's name glowing on the screen, and the sickening confirmation that his wife and brother had betrayed him. Charles, are you even listening? Diane asked, raising an eyebrow. He looked up abruptly. Yeah, Mom? Just thinking. You've been doing a lot of that lately, Diane said, narrowing her eyes. Is something wrong? No, it's fine, he replied quickly, glancing at Stella. She met his gaze with a slight tilt of her head, her expression unreadable. The meal dragged on, Charles's anger simmering just beneath the surface. He replayed scenarios in his mind. How to confront her, what to say, whether he could hold back the storm of emotions threatening to burst. Finally, unable to take it any longer, he set his fork down with deliberate care. Stella, he said, his voice firm and steady, can we talk privately? The conversation at the table came to an abrupt halt. Diane glanced between them, a flicker of concern crossing her face. Now? Stella asked, her smile faltering. Yes, now, Charles replied, not breaking eye contact. Stella hesitated, her fingers tightening around her glass of water. All right. She stood, smoothing her dress, and followed him down the hallway to their bedroom. Charles closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment before turning to face her. What's this about? She asked, crossing her arms. Charles's throat felt dry as he searched for the right words. Finally he spoke. I know about you and Nathan. For a moment, her face froze. The confident facade slipped, and her eyes widened. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. Oh, she said casually, sitting on the edge of the bed. So, that's all you have to say? Charles asked, his voice rising. You're not even going to deny it? She shrugged, her smirk deepening. What's the point? You've clearly made up your mind. So, what are you going to do? Cry about it? The casual dismissal hit him like a punch to the gut. He took a step forward, his hands trembling at his sides. Why, Stella? Why would you do this to us? To our family? Why? She echoed, tilting her head as if the question were absurd. Maybe because you're too boring, Charles. You work, you come home, you play with the kids, and then you go to bed. Where's the excitement? Where's the passion? Charles's jaw clenched. Passion? You think betrayal is passion? What about our vows, Stella? What about our children? Didn't they matter to you? Don't you dare bring the kids into this, she snapped, her tone sharpening. I've been a good mother to them. A good mother? Charles laughed bitterly. A good mother doesn't destroy her children's family for a cheap thrill. Stella stood, her face inches from his, her eyes blazing. You don't get it, do you? Nathan knows how to make a woman feel alive. He's fun. He's spontaneous. Maybe you should take a few notes from him. Charles recoiled as if struck. His fists clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. You're unbelievable, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And you're predictable, she shot back, brushing past him toward the door. Stella, he said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. This isn't over. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob, and turned to face him. Oh, it is, Charles. You'll forgive me, because you always do. You're too weak to do anything else. Without waiting for a reply, she opened the door and walked out, leaving Charles alone in the room. For a long time, he stood there, staring at the empty doorway. His chest felt tight, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. Instead, he sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. The house was quiet now, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He could hear Diane and Stella talking in the kitchen, their voices low but calm, as if nothing had happened. Charles sat there for hours, his thoughts racing. He had confronted her, but it didn't feel like a victory. If anything, he felt more lost than ever. The image of Stella's smirk haunted him, her words replaying in his mind. As the night deepened, Charles made a silent vow. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Stella might think she'd won, but she had no idea what was coming. Charles sat on the couch in the living room, his hands clenched together as if holding himself together. The weight of Stella's betrayal bore down on him, like a crushing wave, and now, the confrontation with his mother was imminent. He had come to Diane seeking understanding, support, anything to steady himself in the storm. Diane entered the room, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. She placed it on the coffee table and sat across from him, her posture upright and calm. You look like you haven't slept, she said, pushing a cup toward him. I haven't, Charles admitted, his voice low. He stared at the tea, but didn't reach for it. Mom, I need to talk to you about Stella. Diane's expression softened. I figured something was wrong. You've been acting strange for days. Charles drew a deep breath, steadying himself. She's been cheating on me. Diane's hand froze halfway to her cup. What? With Nathan? The words came out clipped, bitter, almost choking him. For a moment, Diane said nothing. Her lips pressed together in a tight line, and her eyes darted toward the window. Finally, she sighed, shaking her head. Charles, I need you to listen to me carefully. Charles leaned forward, searching her face for some sign of outrage or support. Instead, her voice took on a tone of stern authority. Stella made a mistake, Diane said, her gaze fixed on him. One wild night doesn't mean you throw away your marriage. Charles blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. A mistake? Mom, she's been sleeping with Nathan, your other son. How can you call this a mistake? It's not like she's doing it every day, Diane replied firmly. People make mistakes, Charles. You've made them, I've made them, and now Stella has. But that doesn't mean you destroy your family over it. Charles stared at her, his jaw tightening. This isn't a mistake, Mom. It's a betrayal. A massive, unforgivable betrayal. Unforgivable? Diane scoffed, leaning back in her chair. Don't be so dramatic. Do you know how many marriages survive infidelity? Plenty. Think of your children, Charles. Are you really going to tear their lives apart because of one night of poor judgment? Charles's fists tightened on his knees. So that's it? You're telling me to just ignore it? To forgive and pretend it didn't happen? Yes, Diane said firmly. That's exactly what I'm telling you. If you divorce Stella over this, you can never call me your mother again. I won't stand by while you destroy this family over something so trivial. Trivial? Charles's voice rose, incredulous. Mom, she cheated on me. With my own brother. How can you sit there and defend her? Diane's expression hardened. Because family comes first, Charles. Always. Stella is still the mother of your children. And Nathan is your brother. Are you really going to let one mistake drive a wedge between all of us? Charles felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. You're not serious. You can't possibly believe what you're saying. I am serious, Diane said, folding her arms. This family has been through enough. I won't let you ruin it over something that can be fixed. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Stella walked into the room, her expression calm, almost smug. She must have overheard enough of the conversation to know what was happening. Charles, she said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. Are you really dragging your mother into this? That's low. Even for you. Charles turned to her, his anger barely contained. You think I'm the problem here? Stella smirked. Oh, I know you are. Maybe if you were half as attentive as Nathan, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Attentive? Charles repeated, his voice shaking. You've got some nerve, Stella. She shrugged, sauntering into the room. I'm just being honest. Nathan knows how to make a woman feel appreciated. Maybe you could learn a thing or two from him. Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Get out of this room before I say something I can't take back. Stella tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, come on, Charles. Don't act like such a victim. You've always been so predictable. It's honestly boring. Boring? Charles's voice cracked, a mix of anger and disbelief. Boring is being faithful. Boring is raising a family and trusting your wife to do the same. Diane stood, placing herself between them. Enough, both of you, she said sharply. This isn't helping anything. Charles pointed a trembling finger at Stella. You've destroyed everything. And you, he turned to Diane, you're enabling her. How can you stand there and defend this? Diane's eyes narrowed. Because I know what's at stake, Charles. Your children need a stable home. If you divorce Stella, they'll be the ones who suffer most. They'll suffer more growing up in a house built on lies, Charles shot back. Stella laughed bitterly. Oh, please. You'd be doing them a favor by staying. You think they'll thank you for tearing everything apart. Charles's chest heaved with restrained fury. Don't talk to me about what's best for my kids. You gave up that right the moment you decided to betray me. Diane stepped closer to Charles, her tone softening slightly. Please, Charles, think about what you're doing. Don't let your pride ruin everything. It's not pride, Mom, Charles said through gritted teeth. It's dignity, something you apparently don't value. Stella scoffed. Dignity? You're so hung up on your ego that you can't see what's right in front of you. People make mistakes, Charles. Get over it. Charles stared at her, his disbelief turning into cold resolve. You know what? You're right, Stella. People make mistakes. And mine was ever trusting you in the first place. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out of the room. Diane called after him, but he didn't stop. His footsteps echoed down the hallway as he made his way to the front door, slamming it shut behind him. Outside, the cool evening air hit his face, calming him slightly. He stood on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. His mother's words and Stella's smugness played over and over in his mind. Family, stability, forgiveness. They had twisted those words into weapons, using them to justify the unforgivable. But Charles knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stay. Not like this. Charles sat on the edge of his bed, his hands running through his hair, his mind racing as dawn began to creep through the blinds. His children, Brielle and Hunter, were sound asleep in their shared room, their gentle breaths a faint reminder of the innocence he needed to protect. The house was silent, but Charles's thoughts were loud. Stella's betrayal, Diane's ultimatum, it all swirled together into a suffocating storm. His gaze drifted to the packed duffel bag near the door, its contents carefully selected during his sleepless night. He had made up his mind. He tiptoed to the children's room, pushing the door open slowly. Brielle was curled up under a pink blanket, her favorite stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. Hunter lay sprawled on his back, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm. Charles's heart ached as he stood there. I'm doing this for you, he whispered softly, leaning against the doorframe. I won't let this mess hurt you. The clock read 6:30 a.m. Diane and Stella were early risers, but had planned a shopping trip later that morning. Timing was everything. Charles knew he had a small window to leave undetected. As he prepared breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs, he heard footsteps behind him. Brielle rubbed her eyes, her hair sticking up in all directions. "Daddy," she said, her voice groggy. "Good morning, sweetheart," Charles said, crouching to her level. "How about we have breakfast, and then we go on a little adventure today?" Adventure. Her eyes lit up. "Yep," he said, tapping her nose. "Just you, me, and Hunter? A special day together." By 8:30 a.m., Diane and Stella had left the house. Charles wasted no time. He ushered the kids back into their room and gently but firmly instructed them to pack their favorite toys and clothes into their small backpacks. "Are we going far?" Hunter asked, stuffing action figures into his bag. "Not too far," Charles replied, zipping up his duffel. "Just somewhere new. Somewhere safe." Brielle frowned. "Is Mommy coming?" Charles hesitated, crouching in front of her. "Not this time, honey. This is just for us." Once everything was ready, Charles moved swiftly. He carried the bags to the car and made one final sweep of the house, his eyes lingering on the wedding photo hanging in the living room. His jaw tightened. Without a second glance, he turned off the lights and locked the door. The drive to the new apartment was quiet. Brielle and Hunter, sensing the tension in their father, kept to themselves. Charles glanced at them through the rearview mirror, their small faces pressed against the windows as they watched the world blur by. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Hunter asked eventually. "To a place where we can all be happy," Charles replied, forcing a reassuring smile. The apartment was modest but clean, with 2 small bedrooms and a cozy living area. Charles had arranged the lease a few days earlier, paying up front to avoid any delays. As they stepped inside, the kids wandered around, exploring their new space. "Can we put our toys here?" Brielle asked, pointing to a corner of the living room. "Of course," Charles said, kneeling to help her unpack. "This is our home now." For the rest of the morning, Charles busied himself setting up the apartment, making it feel as welcoming as possible. He laid out the children's bedding, arranged their toys, and stocked the fridge with essentials. Around noon, Charles's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He stared at the screen. Diane. He hesitated, knowing he couldn't avoid her forever. With a sigh, he answered. "Hello, Charles." Diane's voice was frantic. "Where are you? What's going on?" "I'm not coming back, Mom," Charles said calmly. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Stella just called me. She said the house is empty and the kids are gone." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about what's best for my children," Charles replied firmly. "They deserve better than to grow up in that house." Diane's tone turned icy. "You're being selfish, Charles. Do you have any idea what this will do to your children? To Stella? To me? I know exactly what it'll do," Charles said, his voice steady. "And I've made my decision." "You're making a mistake," Diane hissed. "Mark my words, you'll regret this." "I've already made too many mistakes," Charles said before hanging up. He turned the phone to silent and set it face down on the counter. The afternoon passed peacefully. Charles played board games with the kids and read them stories, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a semblance of control, a sense that he was doing the right thing. But just as they sat down for dinner, his phone vibrated again. This time, the caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Against his better judgment, he picked it up. "Hello. Is this Charles?" a woman's voice asked, her tone professional but urgent. "Yes, this is Charles. This is Nurse Avery from St. Mary's Hospital. We have your mother and wife here in the emergency room. There's been an accident. You need to come immediately." Charles's blood ran cold. "What happened?" "I can't discuss details over the phone," the nurse said gently. "But I recommend you come as soon as possible." For a moment, Charles stood frozen, his mind racing. He glanced at his children, who were giggling over a spilled drink, blissfully unaware. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll be there soon." As he hung up, Charles felt a familiar weight settle on his chest. He had wanted distance from the chaos, but now it seemed the chaos had followed him. He stood in the living room, staring at the phone in his hand, his mind churning with questions. What kind of accident? How serious was it? Did he even care? "Daddy." Brielle's voice broke through his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Charles forced a smile, kneeling to her level. I'm fine, sweetheart. I just have to step out for a bit. Miss Stella from next door will come stay with you, and Hunter. Okay. Brielle nodded, her brow furrowed. You'll come back? Always, Charles said, kissing her forehead. As he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited him at the hospital would change everything yet again. Charles strode into the hospital, his pulse hammering in his ears. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit him as he passed the front desk, barely glancing at the nurse who pointed him toward the waiting area. He spotted Diane and Stella immediately. Diane was pacing, her face pale and drawn, while Stella sat hunched in a chair, her hands clutching a tissue that she twisted nervously. The moment Diane saw him, she rushed forward. "Charles!" she cried, gripping his arm. "Thank God you're here." Charles shrugged her off, his expression cold. "What happened?" Diane's lip quivered, and tears welled in her eyes. "It's Nathan," she choked out. "He had an accident. A bad one." Charles's jaw tightened. "What kind of accident?" Diane hesitated, as if unsure whether to say more. Stella stood and took a tentative step toward him, her face streaked with tears. "We were driving back from the mall," Stella began, her voice trembling. "He lost control of the car. They say it was a blowout." Charles's stomach twisted, but his expression remained impassive. "Is he alive?" Diane nodded quickly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Yes, but barely. He's in surgery right now." Charles crossed his arms, his gaze flicking between them. "And what does this have to do with me?" "Charles, please," Stella said, reaching for his hand. He stepped back, her fingers grasping at the empty air. "We need you. We've all made mistakes, but we're still family. Nathan needs us now. I need you." Charles laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "Family? You're seriously going to use that word right now?" Stella flinched, her tears flowing freely. "I know we've hurt you, but can't you see this is bigger than all of us? We have to come together." "Come together?" Charles's voice rose, drawing the attention of a passing nurse. "Do you even hear yourself? You tore this family apart with your lies and betrayal, and now you want to pretend it never happened." Diane stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Charles, please," she said softly. "I know you're angry, but this isn't the time to hold grudges. Nathan's life is hanging by a thread." Charles turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to lecture me about family, Mom. You defended her. You enabled this mess. And now you expect me to play the dutiful son and husband? No, I'm done." Diane's face crumpled, but before she could respond, Stella fell to her knees, sobbing. "I was wrong, Charles. I was selfish and stupid, and I ruined everything. But please, please don't walk away. I'll do anything to fix this." Charles stared down at her, his expression unmoved. "Anything?" he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Like stop lying? Stop blaming me for your mistakes?" "Somehow, I doubt it." Stella reached for his leg, her desperation evident. "Please, Charles, I'm begging you. Don't let us fall apart." Charles stepped back, her hands slipping off him. He looked at Diane, then at Stella, his gaze hardening. "You want forgiveness? You want me to forget everything you've done?" "Sorry, but that's not going to happen." A tense silence hung in the air as Stella's sobs grew louder. Diane stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Charles took a deep breath and turned toward the hallway leading to the surgical wing. "Where is he?" he asked, his tone flat. Diane pointed shakily. "The ICU waiting area. They'll let us know when he's out of surgery." Without another word, Charles walked away. The ICU waiting room was cold and quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Charles sat in a corner, his hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor. He hadn't come for Nathan, not really. He wasn't sure why he had come at all. His thoughts drifted to his children, safe in their new apartment. They were his only reason for staying grounded, for not letting the betrayal consume him entirely. The door opened, and Diane entered, her steps hesitant. She sat down beside him, leaving a space between them. "Charles," she began softly. "Don't," he interrupted. She sighed, twisting her wedding ring. "I know I've hurt you. I know I failed as a mother by not supporting you when you needed me most. But Nathan," He's still your brother. Charles looked at her, his expression unreadable. And what does that mean to me now? Diane's voice cracked. It means there's still a chance to make things right. For all of us? Charles shook his head, a humorless smile tugging at his lips. You still don't get it, do you? Some things can't be fixed. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Before Diane could respond, a doctor entered the room. He was tall and tired-looking, his scrubs stained with blood. Family of Nathan Blake? He asked. Diane and Charles both stood. How is he? Diane asked anxiously. The doctor sighed, removing his surgical cap. We managed to stabilize him, but he's in critical condition. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Diane clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer under her breath. Charles, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Can we see him? Diane asked. The doctor nodded. One at a time, for a few minutes. Diane turned to Charles. Do you want to go first? No, Charles said bluntly. You go. As Diane followed the doctor down the hallway, Charles sat back down, his mind racing. He didn't know what he felt, anger, pity, indifference. It all swirled together, leaving him hollow. When Diane returned, her face was streaked with tears. He's asking for you, she said quietly. Charles hesitated, then stood. He wasn't sure what compelled him to go. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe he needed closure. Nathan lay in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. His face was pale, his eyes barely open. Charles, he rasped, his voice weak. Charles stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed. Nathan. I'm sorry, Nathan said, his voice cracking. I messed up. I hurt you. Stop, Charles interrupted. Don't waste your breath. We both know sorry doesn't fix this. Nathan's eyes glistened with tears. I wanted to make things right. Charles shook his head, his jaw tightening. You made your choices, Nathan. Now you have to live with them. Nathan closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Charles turned and walked out of the room, leaving the past behind him. Back in the waiting room, Diane and Stella looked at him expectantly. Well? Stella asked. Charles stared at her, his expression unreadable. I've said everything I needed to say. Without another word, he walked out of the hospital, his steps resolute. He didn't look back. The days dragged on for Diane and Stella, each one a stark reminder of their fall from grace. The house, once filled with laughter and comfort, now echoed with silence. Bills piled up on the dining table, unopened and foreboding. Diane sat at the table one morning, her hands trembling as she calculated expenses against the meager pension she had left. We're going to have to sell more of the jewelry, Diane muttered, not looking up. Stella, sitting across from her, rubbed her temples. What's left to sell? You already pawned your bracelets, and I sold my wedding ring. Diane sighed heavily, her eyes misting. We wouldn't be in this mess if Charles hadn't been so stubborn. Stella slammed her hand on the table. Stubborn? You mean if he hadn't left after we? She stopped mid-sentence, realizing her words were digging a deeper hole. Diane glared at her. Don't say it. Don't even think it. We just have to get through this, Stella. For Nathan. Nathan was recovering at a rehabilitation facility, his once vibrant energy dulled by weeks of surgeries and therapy. He spent most of his time in a wheelchair, staring out the window at the bleak courtyard. The accident had left him with a permanent limp, and the painkillers barely took the edge off. One afternoon, Stella visited him, carrying a bag of homemade sandwiches, though homemade was a stretch considering the empty fridge back home. Hey, she said softly, setting the bag on the table next to him. Nathan turned his head slowly, his face gaunt. Stella, he said flatly, what do you want? She flinched at his tone, but sat down anyway. I brought you something to eat. You need your strength. He snorted, shaking his head. Strength for what? Look at me, Stella. I'm a joke. I can't even stand for more than a few minutes without feeling like my legs are going to give out. You'll get better, Stella said, her voice trembling. Better? Nathan's eyes narrowed. We both know that's not true. And even if I did, what do I have to go back to? No job, no money, no family worth calling one. Stella looked away, her eyes filling with tears. We'll figure it out. Together. Nathan scoffed. Together? Don't make me laugh. You're just as lost as I am. Meanwhile, Charles's life had taken a completely different trajectory. He poured every ounce of energy into rebuilding his and his children's lives. His modest apartment had transformed into a warm, inviting home filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. "Daddy, look," Brielle said one evening, holding up a drawing she had made at school. It was a picture of their new family. Her, Hunter, and Charles, all smiling under a bright sun. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Charles said, crouching to her level. "I'll put it on the fridge. Can we get ice cream tonight?" Hunter piped up, his eyes hopeful. Charles chuckled. "Ice cream on a school night? I don't know. Please." Both children chorused, their faces lighting up. "All right," Charles relented, ruffling Hunter's hair. "But only if you finish your homework first." At work, Charles had thrown himself into his career. His boss noticed his renewed focus and rewarded him with a promotion that came with a significant raise. The extra income allowed him to enroll Brielle and Hunter in after-school activities, something they had missed while living under the tension of his previous life. "You're doing great," his co-worker, Linda, said one afternoon as they reviewed a project together. "Thanks," Charles replied, glancing at the clock. "I just want to make sure everything's set before I head out." "It's Hunter's soccer practice today." Linda smiled. "You're a good dad, Charles. Your kids are lucky to have you." He nodded, feeling a pang of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was in control of his life. Back at Diane's house, things were unraveling. The electricity had been shut off for a week before they could scrape together enough money to pay the bill. The refrigerator was nearly empty, save for a half carton of milk and a loaf of bread. Diane and Stella sat in the dim living room, lit only by a single candle. "This can't go on," Diane said, her voice hollow. "What do you want me to do?" Stella snapped. "Magic money out of thin air." Diane stared at her, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We could call Charles." Stella froze, the suggestion hanging in the air like a bad omen. "You really think he'd help us after everything?" "He's not heartless," Diane said, though her voice lacked conviction. Stella shook her head. "He's done with us, Diane. And honestly, I don't blame him." Nathan's condition continued to weigh heavily on them all. One evening, Diane visited him at the rehab center. "Mom," Nathan said weakly as she entered the room. "You didn't have to come." "I'm your mother," she said firmly, sitting beside him. "Of course I had to come." He looked down at his hands, his expression one of defeat. "I screwed up, didn't I?" Diane's eyes filled with tears. "We all did, Nathan. But we have to find a way to move forward." "How?" Nathan asked, his voice cracking. "Charles is gone. He hates me. He hates all of us." Diane reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "We can't give up on each other, Nathan. That's all we have left." As the months passed, Charles began to find joy again. One sunny Saturday, he took Brielle and Hunter to the park. They played on the swings, ran through the grass, and laughed until their sides hurt. Watching them, Charles felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time, he realized he didn't need the family he'd left behind. He had everything he needed right here. "Daddy," Brielle said as they sat on a bench eating ice cream. "Are we happy now?" Charles smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Yes, sweetheart. We're very happy." And he meant it. The sunlight poured into the cozy cafe, where Charles sat across from Veronica, a woman he had met through a mutual friend. Their conversations had started simply, a shared laugh here, a kind word there, but over time, they had grown into something deeper. "You're awfully quiet today," Veronica said, her voice warm but curious. She stirred her tea, her hazel eyes fixed on him. Charles smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "Just thinking, it's been a long road to get here." Veronica tilted her head, her brows knitting slightly. "Do you mean here with me, or just here in life?" "Both," Charles replied, his tone thoughtful. "I wasn't sure I'd ever trust anyone again. But you've made me see things differently." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "Charles, you don't have to say anything. I can see it in how you treat your kids, how you carry yourself. You've been through hell, but you didn't let it break you." He chuckled softly. "I had no choice. My kids deserved better, and I wasn't going to let them down." Their relationship blossomed naturally. Veronica wasn't flashy or overbearing. She was steady, kind, and patient. She respected Charles's boundaries, never pushing him to share more than he was comfortable with. One evening, as they walked through the park hand in hand, Charles noticed Brielle and Hunter running ahead, their laughter filling the air. "They've grown so much," Veronica said, her voice tinged with admiration. Charles nodded, watching his children fondly. "They're my everything. They've been my anchor through all of this. And you've been theirs," Veronica said, squeezing his hand. "You've built something beautiful, Charles. You should be proud of yourself." Life with Veronica brought a lightness Charles hadn't felt in years. They took things slow, allowing their connection to deepen without rushing into anything. For the first time, Charles felt the stirrings of hope. Hope for a future where love wasn't synonymous with pain. One day, Veronica invited him over for dinner. As they cooked together, the kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and roasted vegetables, Charles found himself smiling more than he had in years. "Careful, the pasta's boiling over," Veronica teased, nudging him with her elbow. Charles laughed, grabbing a towel to wipe up the mess. "Guess I'm out of practice. It's been a while since I cooked anything fancy." "Well, it's never too late to learn," she said, grinning. Their laughter echoed through the kitchen, a sound Charles hadn't realized he missed so much. Meanwhile, Diane and Stella's lives continued to spiral downward. The house had been sold to cover mounting debts, and they now shared a cramped apartment in a less-than-desirable part of town. Nathan, still struggling with his health, had cut ties with both women, leaving them to fend for themselves. Stella stared at the stack of bills on the coffee table, her hands trembling. "I can't believe this is my life," she muttered. Diane, sitting across from her, sighed heavily. "If Charles had just forgiven us," Stella shot her a glare. "You think this is his fault? We did this to ourselves, Diane. You defended me when you shouldn't have. I betrayed him. What did we expect?" Diane's face hardened. "I expected him to put family first. But no, he had to play the victim." "Maybe because he was the victim," Stella snapped, her voice rising. "You think he didn't have every right to leave? Look at what we did to him." The argument ended in silence, both women too exhausted to continue. Occasionally, Diane or Stella would call Charles, their voices dripping with desperation. "Charles, it's your mother," Diane said one afternoon, her voice strained. I wanted to see how you're doing. And the kids. I miss them." Charles leaned against the kitchen counter, his grip tightening on the phone. "You miss them now? Funny, you didn't think about them when you were defending Stella's betrayal." Diane began to cry softly. "I know I was wrong. I know I failed you. But I'm begging you, Charles. Please, let us be a family again." Charles's tone remained steady but firm. "You chose your side, Mom. You chose to enable Stella instead of standing by me. I've moved on, and so have my kids. Don't call again." He hung up before she could respond, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Years passed, and Charles's life continued to flourish. He and Veronica eventually decided to marry, blending their lives in a way that felt seamless and right. The wedding was a small, intimate affair attended by close friends and family. Brielle and Hunter stood by their father's side, their smiles as wide as his. "Are you happy, Dad?" Hunter asked later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home. Charles looked at his son, his heart swelling with love. "I'm more than happy, buddy. I'm at peace." Brielle leaned against his arm. "We're happy too. Veronica's really nice." Charles kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad you think so. She's a big part of why we're all happy now." One day, as Charles watched his children play in the backyard, Veronica joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "They're amazing, aren't they?" she said, nodding toward Brielle and Hunter. "They are," Charles agreed, his eyes never leaving his kids. Veronica leaned her head on his shoulder. "You did this, Charles. You gave them a life full of love and security. And you gave yourself one too." Charles smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The storm of his past had finally passed, and he stood stronger for having weathered it. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to let go of the bitterness. The betrayal, the pain, the people who had hurt him, they no longer had any power over him. Charles had found his new beginning, and it was everything he had hoped for.